everyone. My name is Vandita Murarka. I'm the founder and CEO of One Future Collective, which is a feminist youth-led not-for-profit based in Mumbai, India. We're partnering with Social Offline, sponsored by We're partnering with Social Offline, sponsored by Smirnoff, to bring to you the Cure Art Festival. And as a part of that, we're curating a panel that looks at queer inclusion at the workplace. I'm very excited about bringing together some of the most brilliant activists I know to have a conversation about what queer inclusion at the workplace can look like. Yes, I'm very excited to introduce each of them to you. I'm going to take you through what each of them does, and I'd love for them to say hello to you after. So Aparupa Vatsalya, I'm going to start with her. Please say a hi to everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Aparupa uses preferred pronouns of she and her and is a postgraduate in law from Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai. And they're also a certified sexuality educator and queer affirmative practitioner. They work at the intersections of gender, sexuality, safety, body neutrality, and also at emotional well-being and social justice, and looking at how these are connected to those aspects. Additionally, Aparupa is also the founder of Bibliotherapy, a very popular mental health book club and support group based in Mumbai, as well as the director of programs and advocacy for Untaboo Education. So glad to have you with us, Aparupa.
I'm so excited.
Yes, likewise. Next we have with us Shambhavi. Shambhavi also uses the preferred pronouns of she and her. Shambhavi is the editor at Youth Ki Awaaz, and since 2015 has been overseeing the LGBTQ vertical and crowdsourcing stories from young queer persons at the intersection of health and well-being, governance, law, education, employment, disability, caste, class, and much more. I've had the good fortune of reading a lot of Shambhavi's work and participating in some of their online campaigns. I'd love for you to say hi to everyone, Shambhavi.
Thank you, Vandita, and hi, everyone.
Thank you. So glad to have you with us. Next up, we have Konanika. Konanika Roy did their Masters in Cultural Studies from SOAS University of London, and they currently work at Godrej India Culture Lab as a content catalyst. They've previously worked at the Humsafar Trust, where they sensitize stakeholders, managed advocacy projects, raised funds, organized community intervention events, and mobilization work, along with conducting research. They have also worked on ground addressing cases of discrimination against LGBTQ persons in Mumbai and in India. So happy to have you with us, Konanika. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you. I love how the panel is so happy and excited. We have our final panelist today, Danielle. Danielle Mendonca also uses the preferred pronouns of she and her. They're an Indian intersex individual who has represented India at the United Nations in 2014. Danielle is also the first intersex Indian TEDx speaker, and they hold a silver medal in Bachelor's of Social Work from Mumbai University. And they're the first to be awarded from the LGBTQ community the Vidyarthi Bharati Ratna Award for Academics. Danielle is a national and international speaker who advocates for LGBTQI issues and the community worldwide. And their life story has inspired a huge number of young people across the world, including me, about how they can go ahead and advocate for these issues in their communities. They've also spoken on forums like the Economist Time event in Hong Kong, Salzburg, Concern, Nepal, Amplify Speak, and many others. Danielle's aim is to create an inclusive and safe space for all genders and to be able to create an equal world with equal opportunity. So glad to have you with us, Danielle. Please say hi to
everyone.
Thank
you so much. I'm so glad to be a part of this panel. So much.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to have all of you with us today. I hope that people listening in will be able to take away important information about what they can do individually and even within their organizations and systems to be able to address the systemic barriers that queer people often face, and also the lack of inclusion and diversity seen in the formal organized sector as well as in the unorganized sector. I want us to be focusing, and this is for the audience and for us to reflect upon as well throughout, on how systemic barriers prevent even access to employment opportunities for queer people across India, and then look at what are things that we can do in terms of law, policy, community care structures, and otherwise, to be able to build a more robust system for support for LGBTQ persons, and to ensure that not only are we bringing in diversity into workplaces, but we're also making these workplaces safer and providing for adequate social security measures. I'll be asking you all some questions, but I'd love for you all to jump in with other opinions and other questions that you might have. And any other comments throughout, please feel free to jump in and let us know. Great, so I'm going to start off with a question that is directed to everybody. And it stems from what I've been saying. So the first question that often comes to my mind as well is, what are barriers to even accessing employment opportunities for queer people? Before we even start talking about how we can include them within workspaces, how do we ensure that they are able to reach those workspaces in the same equitable way? So Kanunika, can we start with you?
Sure. I think when we think about the way that, workplaces are even structured for that matter, and I'm going to talk about, stuff that one goes through and one takes for granted when you talk about, whether you're able to walk into a building. I work at Godrej, and I work at the Godrej headquarters, and the building is a complete glass building. It's white from inside. It's intimidating for anyone. So I think when you talk about access, even the physical access is something that's kind of the first barrier to whether or not LGBTQ people feel welcome there. I feel like sometimes these spaces are alienating to people from, whether it's from people who are from different class backgrounds to caste backgrounds to whether or not, how you identify with your gender. So those are things that we really need to think about right from when you're entering a corporate space to, whether or not you're able to speak to someone, access the kind of spaces, whether you know how to, I mean, it's not just about knowing how to use, say, some of the security measures, but whether or not they're friendly to you. A lot of corporate buildings, for that matter, ask for your ID, and that can be quite a difficult and sort of harrowing experience for trans people. Or for LGBT people, if they are gender non-conforming, for example. So that there are things that we take for granted as, say, cis people or people who are of a certain class, and I think that those are definitely issues that we need to discuss about even entering a building. But of course, more than that is also about whether or not the corporate has the kind of policies that are open to LGBT people. So whether or not the companies, and we're talking about even big companies, multinational companies, that sometimes don't have policies that are welcoming to LGBT people. So I think that if you're looking at even smaller companies, for that matter, those things become even more difficult to kind of enforce, especially in the private sector. And where, I mean, even in the government sector, we don't have, public sector, we don't have enough policies to cover inclusion of LGBT people. So I think those are the two things that throughout the thing that I'm going to be talking about is obviously, socially how a person feels when they enter a space, but also whether they're systemically able to enter that space. Those are things that I think we will talk about as well, but I'm like conscious that everyone might have amazing stuff to say. So, yeah.
You're on mute. Sorry, Vandita.
Sorry, my bad. Thank you for that, Kanunika. I think it also sets a lot of context for the other conversations we'll be having today. Shambhavi, I'd love to know from you as well what you think are possible barriers to access.
Yes, thank you for that question, Vandita. And Kanunika, I don't know if I have amazing stuff to say, but definitely a few things that I wanted to point out. First, when you ask this question, the thing immediately what comes to mind is, hey, is there even any data on this? It sometimes does feel like, this is a subject that hasn't, there isn't enough importance around it to, it's not even important enough to study. So it's difficult to sort of comment on this because of a very stunning lack on data. But I think two axes which come to mind immediately are education and health. These exist outside of the sphere of employment, but they feed directly into it. an incomplete education seems to be the first barrier. I am going to be extrapolating data from Brazil because we don't have so much existing in India right now. A study from Brazil found that 44.9% of interviewees did not even finish elementary school due to their sexual orientation and gender identity. And that's, that's immediately a huge roadblock to going ahead without an education. How exactly are you going to get a job? And if you do somehow get a job, how are you going to hold it down, right? Another axis is healthcare. And I would say particularly mental health, because you have much, much higher rates of suicide attempts, of mood disorders being diagnosed, of substance abuse and dependence. And all of this greatly takes away from your ability to be employed. So the combined effects of all of this is essentially that many LGBTQIA people never even make it to the job market in the first place.
Thank you for that, Shambhavi. I think all of these are excellent points, and they really speak to how often the barriers that LGBTQ persons face are systemic, and they're not necessarily individual problems that can have individual solutions. Thank you. Daniel, I'd love to hear from you as well.
I think when it comes to accessing employment as an opportunity, my first thing of saying is how completely I'm accepted of being myself in the space that I'm about to walk in and work. And how comfortable it is that I can put in my resume that, I do not belong to the typical binary of male and female, when most of the companies still today, even when they call themselves inclusive, they still have on their agenda when it comes to gender, putting it's always male and female. And some of them still have when it says customize. I've never understood what customize is, though, but they still have it. And as my own personal experience, when I'm talking about, when I was in college doing my studies in Bachelor of Social Work, I know the struggle of accessing a simple thing called toilet. So I'm also talking about what heterosexual privileges are, which seems very smaller in day-to-day life. For queer people, it becomes more. For example, accessing a toilet, or even choosing a toilet for themselves in going where they want to go. And many time in interviews, especially for me, accessing is I can never wear men's clothes, especially formals. But many of the corporates and many of the companies demand you that if you look like male, you need to dress formally like a male. And that's where dressing also becomes one of the important point when it comes to accessibility at workplace or employment, because I cannot really fully be who I am and who I want to be uh, in all matters. And also one of the point it comes to my mind, of course, we don't have data accessing uh, uh, as Sambhavi mentioned. Uh, but the saddest part of this country is also that even when we don't have data, we don't even have access to education for some XYZ reason. And it is all because again it just comes to Konika point, where we don't have a policy that we are talking about. It took us so many years to make the government understand that how health is more important, and then we got this health thing. And now with the 21st century, now we are talking about queer place and accessibility. But still, that comes to my again point that yes, we are talking about corporates, but what about these small industries where most of the trans people of this country and most of people who are gender non-confirming, as Sambhavi said, do not finish the education and take up the small workplaces in small industries or karkhanas, where you can't get a policy because it is not even recognized at some point of time. What are these places when discrimination becomes high, even at small jobs? Because I would just like to share a small example where my own transfer was a scavenger, and when she was working, she was brutally raped, and with her own circle, she was discriminated more, and she was given more work to do rather than other people to do, because they felt because of your gender you're more weak, and so you're supposed to do more work. So my question is still, uh, from corporate to small industries, how do we link that accessibility to queer people?
Thank you for that, Daniel. I think those are extremely pertinent points. We will get back to some of this, but it's also jarring how much violence queer people face, sexual and otherwise, in different workspaces and in everyday life. Really, thank you for bringing that up for us. Aparupa, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, basically piggybacking on what Daniel said, right? What is a workplace? What is this employment opportunity that we talk of? These conversations always happen at a certain class and caste location. But are we thinking about you or I as an employer? What about the domestic help who comes to my house? What if they are queer? Have we spoken to our residents welfare association to have policies around that, for instance? What if a driver is queer? Often when a driver drops you to a point, right, they will then go and fraternize with other drivers there. How do we ensure that they're protected there? So we also need to expand the definition of what these employment opportunities are and what a workplace really means, right? And that also brings me to the point of commute to one's workplace. Now, all queer people cannot afford an Uber or private transport. So let's say a person has to use your public transport. Let's say they have to take a train, right? A trans person, which compartment do they get into if they're not visibly trans, right? On their way to the compartment, 10 people will call them sir or madam. The ticket teller may misgender them or use the wrong pronoun. There'll be that odd kid who'll ask, bhaiya hai ki didi hai? If you're in the compartment and you look different than the others, you will get a lot of stares. And all this before you even got into your workplace. You've not even reached your office yet. So it is really, really difficult to be a queer person and an out queer person and visible queer person as that. And let's face it, visibility equates violence. So yeah, so I think we must definitely expand our definition of workplace, employment, commute to employment. How are we looking at these things?
Definitely. Thank you so much for that, Aparupa. I love that even in the first question, we've touched upon how can we even expand the more general labor law-based definition of a workplace and to look at not just the formal organized sector and not just to think about bringing in the unorganized sector, but to understand that the sector exists as is and what are immediate interventions that we can provide to improve access, quality of life, and just protection from discrimination. Thank you for all your points. Just to quickly summarize, some of the barriers you all have mentioned are about physical access, so entering a building or even just getting transport to go there. But other barriers that I think Shambhavi and Daniel also spoke about quite eloquently was just about societal barriers. Like we don't have enough data to even understand how many people are able to reach that age where they can look for employment, or how many people are able to find the sort of education that is required. Or once they do get into a system, what are the sort of structural violence that they face that may inhibit them from being able to exist in that workspace? Thank you so much. This also takes me to my next question to Konanika. I'd love to understand from you that what are some policy legal changes that you see as improving access to employment within the both formal and informal sector?
I think in both, but more so in the informal sector, there is a need actually to recognize the rights.
Sorry,
and
Konanika,
protect.
just a second. Sorry. Is your voice breaking only for me, or is it breaking for other people as well?
It's fine for me.
It's fine? Okay, great.
But if
Just
it's
start
breaking for you,
again.
then
I'm
the
so
recording
sorry. We'll edit it.
would be broken. Sorry. If it's breaking for you, then the recording would be broken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think everyone else is fine, but just give it another shot. So sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I was saying, okay, let me start again. Yeah, I think when we're talking about labor laws, or even about, especially about in the unorganized sector, we really need to talk about including the rights of workers and recognizing and protecting their rights. I think these are definitely areas in which we don't have discussions, especially about LGBT people. and extremely vulnerable people, for example, people who are either in, like Apurupa said, in domestic work or sex work for that matter. Those are areas that we really do need to talk about. Or, for example, a lot of trans people that we know in the Hijra community are into begging because of the traditional, occupations that they have. And we still have a law that criminalizes begging, so we do need to address those as well. And then, of course, larger than that is also to have kind of a overarching anti-discrimination law, which includes issues of workplace harassment. I think the major issue also about, and this is not pertaining mainly to access, but also to whether or not people feel comfortable when they are in the workplace. Say, for example, whether or not people have equal opportunity to enter a workspace and then to apply for jobs. So I think those are two things that I feel like there needs to be more laws around. And I think the transgender protection bill kind of tries to touch on it in some on some level, but again, there is no kind of enforcement mentioned in terms of how a person is supposed to access protection if they require it, or whether or not there is any way in which they can address issues that they have faced at the workplace. So these are things that we need to talk about. Definitely anti-discrimination, at least also in terms of when people are going, applying for jobs, or equal opportunities for jobs, is something that we need to address.
Thank you, Konanika. I think they're excellent points. Just to start off, to have laws that provide for very clear anti-discrimination would be a great place to start from. Anyone else would like to add in something to this?
If I can actually, okay.
Of course.
I also think generally having affirmative action policies also kind of, improves access actually. So whether or not it's a company, or whether it is largely, whether this can be a legal framework which can be enforced by the state, I don't know. But I think definitely there needs to be something which kind of provides more access to trans people especially, but also the LGBT community at large. And I think large MNCs or even private sector companies who have HR policies, for example, can definitely have affirmative action policies that include and outright say that they are looking to employ LGBT people, and a lot of companies have done that. But yeah, there needs to be more of this happening, definitely.
Definitely, that's a great value add, Konanika, because often in the wait for government to take action, I think individual stakeholders forget that they have a role that they can play as well. Us as individuals can advocate within our organizations, and those of us leading organizations can make the push for that for our organizations as well. This gets me to my question for Danielle. Danielle, what do you think in this scenario is something that civil society can do to ensure more inclusion of queer people at the workplace?
I personally feel that there should be a lot of pressure from the civil society to the state and center both, so that a policy can be brought in place, not just said, but a written policy. We know what hazardous has the transgender bill uh, done to many of us, and we are still protesting against it and saying that we don't want this bill because this doesn't goes according to what NALSA judgment had to say. And and how certain group of people, like when we started as a community, we started with LGBTIQ and we started as a whole of queer, but today we see a separation among ourselves too, and this is a truth and a reality that cannot be faced off from. And this is the reason why civil society is also on some or the other part failing to do its part as overall as a society. Because when I remember my first pride as an individual. I remember a lot of people being there irrespective of gender and religion and caste and culture, while today our groups have started dividing into religion forms. Our groups have started claiming to be with a particular religion, and this is really, really problematic, and plus a very big difficulties in coming some of the situation, because the work of civil bodies is to come together as on one platform and not question each other but question the government for bringing in policies, for seeing that the state has a policy. Like for example, Chhattisgarh. I would say Chhattisgarh because I know the amount of work that have can happen for trans people over there, and which is not out and very open to other states, because other states don't want to do. Every time, even in government manifesto, how many times we see that they will be truly working for the LGBTQ community, and how many representatives also we have from the community standing by there. Because I remember last time one person did an election from Bombay from the community, and she was not with that part because many of the people didn't had voting cards. Many of the people didn't have the voting cards to elect. So the work of civil bodies come together and not just talk, but question the government and put pressure on the state and the center to at least get a policy on inclusion at workplaces. And when I say policy inclusion at workplaces, not just saying male and female, but what I like is to use the word diversity of gender in workplaces, and diversity of gender includes everybody. For example, if a transgender who's thrown out of a family and has only studied till a particular fifth or sixth standard, of course, because of her education, you will not get the job what a qualified person will get. But what are the ways we get a trans person or a person who has left out school or who has left out schooling and the family to see that the education continues, and who's going to provide that fund, where that fund is going to come from? Like for example, we have a policy in state nobody knows about. We have a youth policy, but the youth policy does include trans people, but the youth policy is not in place. We don't even know who's the youth minister of Maharashtra. So the work of civil body is to get in line together, and as LGBTQ community, we also start need to being allies for each other. That is where my point is coming from. We need to be an ally for each other and see when discrimination is taking place at workplace, and when you know that Sexual Harassment Act does not include LGBTIQ people, and we see we do have a grievance cell. Where will this person who's being discriminated at workplace will go? We do know we have a name, we have a namesake, so-called the grievance cell. But again, what will happen is my gender will be questioned. That you must have done something, and that is why this thing took place. So the option I only have is whether the job or whether work in pressure under that company, seeing my culprit every day and night. So civil bodies needs to come together to say, okay, we know that Sexual Harassment Act does not include LGBTQ people. How can within a company we can make our own laws? And how do we come together to see that the protection is not just on papers, but really given, justice is really served? Because I have been asked in an interview, my qualification does not matter, but my gender matters before my qualification. So civil bodies need to come together and put pressure again on government and state to say that we need a policy on employment, on education, because that is my first right. And then comes other right belonging with education and employment.
Thank you, Daniel. I was nodding along throughout because these are all such excellent and pertinent points. And I think often civil society forgets that this is its role. Its role is not just like to create parallel systems, but to advocate to make existing systems better and to make it a matter of right. So to not just think of these things as a social service venture, right? Like a company is not just doing charity by employing queer people. It is a matter of a right for a queer person to have access to education opportunities, to employment opportunities. Thank you for bringing that up so beautifully. Something that you also touched upon, which I find very pertinent, is that organizations find it easy after a point to make their organizations more diverse. So they will hire from a certain category of people, they will try to reach out to a certain category, but they don't make their workplaces inclusive. And that's something that I also wanted Aparupa for you to weigh in on, that even if one, how do organizations make themselves more diverse? And once they have done that, how do they make these spaces truly inclusive? Because as Daniel also mentioned, people are dropping out after 10, 12 standard. Where are the funds for their education? How is that skill gap going to be bridged? How are companies going to make sure that people feel included and they just don't feel like they've been put in place as a token representative? And having said that, while it's directed to Aparupa, I'd love for all of you to weigh in as well and give any thoughts that you might have.
Thank you, Vandita. To quote my amazing sibling Prithvi, because why not quote young trans people? They say that, please can we start with a quota everywhere? All companies have this token quota. Please 20%, 30%, 40% dal do. Have this quota, hire us as token peers, have rainbows plastered everywhere, put rainbows during Pride Month, at least start acknowledging us as human beings first, start hiring us, start creating opportunities for us, and then yes, of course, work on making it a safe space for us, because an inclusive space is definitely a safe space. Something very small is respecting another person's pronoun. Okay, you've hired a queer person, now you need to get everybody, you need to create that pronoun positivity. You need to make sure that everybody has that education and is using the right pronouns. So my sibling did a writer's fellowship, I think, with Youth Ki Awaaz, in fact, Shambhavi. And they wrote to Youth Ki Awaaz saying that I would like to, these are my preferred pronouns and this is my preferred name. And there were no questions whatsoever after that. Why, how, when, where, nothing. There were no questions. Immediately the right pronoun and the right name was used. The right name was given in the certificate. So you need to embody truly what that inclusivity means. And also it needs to be a safe space for people to express their gender identity as well, like whatever their expression is. Maybe someone likes to dress more feminine or someone likes to dress more masculine. And that can be jarring for others in the organization, but that's no excuse for you to police what they wear. I mean, even look at the codes, right? The uniforms there are so gendered. To make the to and fro travel to work, like I was saying, to make that safe, Daniel rightly pointed out that there need to be gender neutral washrooms, or maybe you work with the queer people in your organization to figure out how you can make the washrooms more accessible to people of all identities. And also, I think a big question for me is, as someone who only came out of the closet about a year or so ago, and I'm 27, are you only going to hire out queer people? Is that what inclusivity means? Where people need to proclaim to everyone that I'm out and I'm queer, and this is exactly how I'm queer, and only then will you hire us? How do you hire queer people who are closeted, and how do you then make it safe for them? I think a lot of conversation and thought needs to go in there as well.
Vandita, if you don't mind, can I come in, please?
Of course, please go ahead.
I just forgot one point to mention, and it is how civil society role through giving CSR fund is. Where does this fund actually goes in investing? When I have seen companies who are so pro LGBTIQ, but I have seen none of their funds going through the community and working for the welfare of the community, especially when it comes to sponsoring education of trans people or LGBTIQ people in need, or XYZ. Where does this fund go? So the role of the civil society is also looking at funds within their companies and organizations of CSR. If they're so pro LGBTIQ, they support the community and see that the education is there. If we have so much CSR fund, and I hope if that much money was really put into LGBTIQ, we would still have I would not care an old age home or something like that, but a self-care home for LGBTIQ still in India to be done. But we see that the funds are going somewhere, and only companies who put out rainbow flags once in a year saying that we are pro LGBTIQ and make their signs like that. My only question to them is, show that in reality and tell me where is your CSR fund really going? Is it anybody useful for the community, and has it been even been used for the community?
Thank you, Daniel. Apurva, Daniel, excellent points. Go ahead, Apurva.
I just want to add, yeah. So of course, like have mentorship schemes for queer people, have special schemes in terms of like travel, like I was saying, have all of that. And if you're a small organization and you don't have that kind of funds, get creative to make it an inclusive space for queer people. Rangoli competition hi kar do yaar, Pride ke time pe. Get people together. The HR, please organize one of those. If you don't have the funds to conduct a training, ask your employees to do a free course. There are so many free courses on gender and sexuality and inclusivity that are available online. Ask them to do that. Come back together, maybe have a discussion, maybe do a Zoom call. Maybe it's not possible during office hours, maybe a lot like 1 hour during the weekend to have this discussion. So really like get creative with how you can make it an inclusive space, and don't always blame the lack of funds for not taking any proactive action, right?
Thank you, Apurva. Thank you, Daniel. Very excellent points and very pertinent as well. And I love that you all have spoken about the different stages through which an organization can be inclusive, right? A small organization can take efforts where it just organizes events, trainings, and so much of it is available for free now. All you have to do is take that one extra step towards it. And second, for organizations that I feel have the budgets, like Daniel also mentioned, where is your money going? Like, if you are truly LGBTQ inclusive, why are you not directing your funds towards that? And I think this also becomes true of when organizations have like a diversity and inclusion manager, but that division of work has no funds and it has no budgets. So what you're doing also is you're setting your diversity inclusion manager up for failure. And I think a lot of organizations end up doing this where they get queer people on board, but they don't provide them with the tools required for success, which can mean a bunch of things, which could be, like you all mentioned, skill training, just peer building, community building, mentorship, and money. Like, you need money to be able to get things moving. So how do you do that? Great points. Thank you so much. I think a related point that came up from what you were saying, Apurva, was also about how organizations can internally make their spaces safe and inclusive. So what do you do to change internal culture, make it more sensitive, promote allyship? Shambhavi, I'd love to hear from you, because Apurva also mentioned Youth Ki Awaaz has done that beautifully. I'd love to know what you can do internally to improve allyship, to make spaces safer, to just make people more sensitive and aware and in tune with the needs of queer people.
That is a great question, and a very concise answer that I would give is consult actual queer people. I think, a lot of us, we just get stuck in this rut of, okay, we have like this framework and that framework. But like actually ask the stakeholders, who are the people who are going to benefit from sensitization and promoting allyship, and what are their thoughts on things that are missing or things that can be improved. And I think I'd also just like to sort of expand on the conversation we've had so far about tokenism. And I do understand that it can have its benefits, definitely, but we do also need to differentiate between tokenistic and performative allyship. Performative allyship is something that doesn't really actually make any change. It just sort of is very surface layer. So, you can have these sensitization trainings and promote allyship, but if it is completely tokenistic, like putting a rainbow on your logo, then that is something that needs to be investigated. I think we also need to explore the reality. Derogatory remarks does not make you an ally to LGBTQ co-workers. Taking your privilege and your space and turning it queer affirmative is what makes you a real ally. So there's a huge difference between being not something and then being anti something. And that unless all employees are able to make that distinction, any sort of action is going to be skin deep.
If I can jump in as well, Shambhavi, I think that was a great point. And one of the ways that a lot of companies do attempt this, at least, is having employee resource groups. I don't know of any that are currently in Godrej, but that is something that I have been talking about, wanting, needing actually, because often, within the workspace, it's difficult to articulate really the small ways in which you experience homophobia. And I think that if you are able to create spaces where conversations can happen across groups and across levels of employees, and there is something that happens regularly with different levels of employees together, that's of great value. So employee resource groups usually are a space that support this a lot. And I know that in my previous role as well, I used to actually address a lot of corporates through these employee resource groups. So a lot of what you guys have said about talking about policy changes or sensitization is possible through these things. And I also want to kind of go back to things about access that we probably also need to think about when it comes to trans people, especially about things like, say, if you do actually end up having, say, affirmative action, and you aside from all of the pink washing, whatever that you have actually tried to commit to something, there are things that you might have to change about, and these may be very fundamental things, about things that you don't actually worry about your cisgender employees or your straight employees, right? These are things like, say, you need to look at how a trans employee is going to get housing. You need to look at how, whether in the organization they want to undergo transition, do you have medical benefits that allow them to do that? Or do you have even the simplest stuff, right? What are your rules for getting like a bank account details or qualifications from people, right? Are you super rigid about it, or are you flexible? Do your policies allow some kind of flexibility within that? So those are things that we definitely need to think about as well when it comes to trans inclusion in the workplace, aside from everything that everyone has said about infrastructure as well.
Thank you, Konika. I think that adds a lot of very concrete steps that organizations can also take back to their companies and see and try and implement what they can do towards making more large-scale action, perhaps in a more phased manner. These are great points, because to me this also brings up how there is a certain amount of like gaslighting of queer people in organizations, when your basic niceness or your basic not being a bully becomes the standard of allyship. And thanks for bringing that out, Shambhavi. I think that was an excellent point, where allyship has to mean more than I'm not a bully. It has to mean that I'm actively against that sort of bullying or harassment, and I will stand up for you and use my privilege to expand your voice. And I think that's something that is often missing in spaces. So thank you for these points. Kananika, also coming back to something you were talking about, that what can organizations do internally to provide maybe social security measures, right? Like medical funds, banking policies, other policies. So if you could throw more light on what are social security measures that you think perhaps we need in the informal sector, so that comes in from the government for those who are not in an organized company setup, and also perhaps what companies can add towards their LGBTQ employees.
Yeah, I think for the unorganized sector, I think this is a huge challenge, but definitely some of what Daniel as well mentioned already about having, spaces that are safe spaces for trans people or LGBT people in unorganized sectors. So whether it is some sort of housing facilities, or whether it is, spaces where they can address issues of, say, sexual violence or harassment in other spaces. These are really key things. And within companies, definitely expanding, and this is actually also generally expanding the definition of, sexual harassment, for instance, to make it neutral, and while doing so, even after having a neutral sexual harassment policy, to then also talk about having an anti-discrimination one, because sometimes when you make language neutral, you end up also kind of disregarding some of the particular issues that trans people or LGBTQ people might have. And so an anti-discrimination policy will kind of cover that as well. So those are things that I think are key to having and improving people's, yeah. I'm sorry, I completely forgot the question. Can you repeat your question, please? Yeah.
No worries, of course. So my question was that how can we improve social security measures for queer people within
Yeah.
both the formal and the informal sector?
Yeah. So I think some of that applies to what I was saying. But also, I think, yeah, within the within companies, I think I know more about that than I know about the unorganized sector. But yeah, definitely having gender neutral medical benefits, and also benefits that cover, say, sexual reassignment surgery, or having partner benefits that everyone has really in a company. Or actually there are also simpler things that you need to think about when you're when you're when you think you are LGBT friendly. Things like, I saw a circular from a corporate recently, which said, take a photo with your husband and your kids to show that you're celebrating Father's Day. It was just like, okay, well, that assumes a lot. And so things that obviously, other people in the kinds of language that you're using as well. And these are things that obviously, even though are written into policy, don't translate in action on ground. So how do you bring this kind of sort of safety for LGBT people? Those are things that people should question. And apart from that, I think, yeah, like I live with my partner, and I'm out in the workplace as well. And I'm very grateful to have the ability to kind of have medical health support for her as well as me, from my company. So those are things that make me feel really secure about the way that I function in a workplace, and make me feel that I am welcome here. So definitely those are things that I would say should be available to queer people in organizations.
Thank you for that, Konika. Again, very concrete points about what companies can do, like look at improving coverage of healthcare, providing additional healthcare, maybe even housing support for queer people who works for you. Daniel, I'd love to hear from you as well in terms of what social security measures can possibly be provided.
For me, when it comes to social security, of course, Konika has covered most of the points which I was supposed to. But uh, whenever we have sessions, sensitization session, which I feel, we always do it with the staff, and and there's a lot of people that are there. But we forget the staff that is on daily means that we meet every day, day-to-day life, is the watchman, is the cab driver we come with to the office, or is the housekeeping staff or the logistics staff. Because with them there is no session that is really been taken, and this becomes really difficult for LGBTQ people, as for queer people, as in daily life, for those social securities. Because there may be comment that comes from a driver which you may not know, though your company is inclusive, though your employees are trying to be inclusive, but you miss a large segment of people out. And these are these people which we work on daily basis and which we see it every day, though they may not say it on the face to us because I'm working there. But with time or something or the other, there must be a little, here and there talking about me that will happen कि ये ऐसा है, ये ऐसे चलता है, ये ऐसे करता है, which is one of the parts which I have seen during that time. And I don't blame them, because the sensitization has not reached from the top to the ground level of approach when we are talking. And also a lot of time what happens is, of course, uh, when I join the company and I'm getting the stay, and stay has been provided and stuff like that, what happens is, suppose when I'm Like, I don't want to be out in my family. And there is a case. There are two examples which I would like to give here is when it comes to social security. One example is where one person wanted to be open at the workplace, but didn't want it to be open in the house. That person was not open in the house, was not out, but wanted to be out of the closet in the office because he found that the office was more inclusive and this is the place where I can be out. But what happened during that time is when security check goes on, when an office person goes to the house to, to check whether the person is staying here, not staying here, and that person opened up and saying कि आपको नहीं पता कि आपका बेटा gay है. And the choice of not being out at home and because of the lack of education and sensitization from the office side made this person forcefully come out at home. And of course, there were a lot of other things that the person need to face. And even with pension scheme, where I know, which is one of an example from my own office where I used to work at once upon a time, where this, when a person doesn't get married for a very long period of time, everybody like in the office are, so he's not getting married. I think there's something wrong with him. Maybe he's a gay or, he's not able to satisfy on all that stuff. When the person came to retirement and when he went to the HR and said, listen, I know there are 4-5 months for my retirement, but I want to share something really personal with you. And he said, and he came out as, he said, I'm a gay man. I have a partner. And if anything happens to me or something happens to me, I want to put a nominee of my partner. And that HR went and told everybody in and out the office. And before the retirement age, the person had to take a quick retirement because, of all the talking that happens around. So when I'm talking about social security, I'm also talking about my own social life that I do not want to be discussed in the office. For example, a very simple thing is that everybody comes up in our office after a weekend and start talking about how they had fun on their weekend with their girlfriends or how they had fun with their families. But I, being a very closeted person, I cannot openly say, oh, I went out with my boyfriend and it was a great date night and it was lovely. Or I feel insecure about sharing, or my family doesn't talk to me because I'm out and open. So this is also a very emotional kind of a thing that happens because, and I have to make, and whenever I have to come on Monday office, I have to sort of make all types of excuses in my mind how I'm going to say, how did I spend my week, and I have to say, oh yeah, and I start excusing people that please don't come to me. So social security is also about discussing someone's social life and asking personal questions even when you're out and open in your offices. I know many people, but there are people who go beyond the reason and say, hey, you know what, don't take offense, but I want to know as an intersex person, as a trans person, how do you enjoy sex? What are your organ parts look like? And these kinds of things, I can't go in the grievance cell and complain because if I go there, it would be like, oh no, he was just asking you general knowledge question. And you need to answer them because they're new to you. And only when you make them understand, they will understand you. And I'm like, no, shut the thing out because you can't ask me such personal questions about my personal life. So when I'm talking about social security is also discussing about someone's social life. It is discussing about something very personal that have to do with my body and sex because sexuality is a part of everybody's life. But whether I want to be open about it or no should be a complete personal choice. And companies needs to take this uh, in in written and in saying that when you're hiring LGBTQ people, you are not doing any favor on them because they are contributing to your company and they're contributing to the country in terms of GDP. And the more you employ LGBTIQ people, the more your country grows in terms of GDP and your country grows in terms of showing how inclusive and inclusive you are. But that doesn't mean you get the privilege of asking them personal question about their sex life, family life, and what organs do they have.
Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add two sort of anecdotes of things that I've seen in the unorganized sector that also need to be addressed. So when I was, I used to get a lot of cases when I was working in the previous organization of discrimination and violence. And one of the instances that I got was of a person who was a trans woman working in a dance bar, and she got, beaten up, brutalized right outside her bar, where she used to work, and people around the bar, employees of the bar saw this happen. But right after, this happened, she tried to get help, and everyone in the organization, I mean the bar, the organization kind of was, said they don't want to be involved in this. And it went down to even the police, for example, making her go from station to station trying to just get this address. She had wounds that were visible. Okay. She had all of the proof, she had witnesses there, but the police weren't able to address the issue. The bar completely, they said that they are not going to be involved in this because it happened outside the bar. So these are things really that put LGBTQ people, and especially trans people, in very vulnerable positions, because the law kind of does not even is not able to address violence against trans people. And having a framework that talks about violence in a more broad sense, that's also something that can help address issues that happen in the workplace. And I think those are definitely things. So we need to have a theory of power or a theory of violence that addresses issues of LGBT people as well. And this needs to be applicable in policy, in law as well. And the second case that I want to bring up is also about issues that people face, of trying to get their gharana system, for instance, people from the Hijra community, trying to get support from their Hijra family, so to speak. Often you get companies, or even employers, small companies, or people in the unorganized sector, kind of not acknowledging the fact that this is a system of family. So somehow also kind of acknowledging that alternative family structures exist will help eventually get employment benefits, or also get kind of social security for the LGBTQ community. So these are two things that I think in the unorganized sector definitely need to be addressed. Yeah.
Vandita, can I pitch in? I just forgot a point. I've written it, but since Konika brought it, can I bring
Yes,
in a
Daniel.
point, please?
Of course. Yes,
I
of
said
course.
about the Gharana system and all. It's important at when we are talking about social security at this moment of time. It's high time that we address violence within the community and outside the community, because a lot of time it is not as much as violence we face outside the community, but the discrimination that we face based on gender, color, uh, femininity, boys being feminine within the community. And that is where we need to address at some point of time, because we always talk about support from the outer community, but what about social security within your own community? When apps like Grindr, Blued, and I want to bring this out, that apps where gay apps are there, the level of abuse, the level of discrimination, the level of being who you are is there within that system of that social life within your community. How are we going to address such a thing? Because we are always asking the heterosexual community to say, you change your minds, you take a step forward, you do policies for us. But what about the eternal violence as we face? Because I remember as an intersex person, or anybody as a bisexual man or a bisexual woman, that the comments that we get from these apps are so heart paining, and sometimes it cuts you off, because you feel you are a part of the rainbow community and you yourself are discriminating here within yourselves. How are you going to stand united out there and say, hey, come on, support us, when your own community has this clashes of color, race, class, and religion? And not just color, class, class. And now we have come to the whole point of top, bottom, versatile, and I don't know, X, Y, Z, and Z. So not just social security outside the community, but also social security within the system that we believe is our family.
Can I add, Vandita?
Thank you, Danielle. Yes, of course.
Thank you so much for that, Daniel, because bi erasure is so real, and that's what prevented me from coming out for the longest period of time, and that's what led to like self gaslighting, me not believing in myself that I'm queer enough. So thank you so much for that. I literally have goosebumps. And yeah, you're very right in saying that we as community members need to support our community, and especially those of us who have cis Savarna privileges. Please stand up for your trans brothers, your trans sisters. Please stand up for people from lower castes, your Bahujan queer people. And we need to start sharing our privileges well within the community. And you're so right in saying that. Literal goosebumps.
Thank you for that, Aparupa. I just want to reiterate what Aparupa said. Everything that you all have been talking about just brings again to me that there is so much work still to be done, both within and outside of our community spaces. And I really resonate with what Aparupa said as well, because I don't think I've ever formally come out. And it's always taken me such a long time to even just accept the fact that I can be who I am and still be queer without also giving into like a media representation of what a queer person looks like, how they perform their queerness, what I need to fulfill, like what checklist do I need to fulfill to be queer enough. And I think that was really important for me as well. So thank you. But also just to touch upon the social security measures that you all have been talking about, especially pertinent for us to understand and recognize that queer people's families and structures are going to be so different from what a heteronormative structure has looked like for so long. So to recognize that and also to provide the same benefits and coverages that government policies and company policies provide in the same manner as you would to someone's biological family, right? So I think that's an excellent point raised. And it also takes me to my final question, which is to Shambhavi and to Aparupa, is to think about what are some laws, reservation systems, perhaps policies that companies can bring in internally, even if national law has not changed yet, to reduce the discrimination and violence, or at least provide redressal against it, that people face because of their gender or sexual orientation.
Yes. So I'm going to be repeating a little bit of what Konika has already mentioned vis-a-vis policies like paternity leave, parental leave, gender neutral leave for parents, benefits for same-sex partners, which there are certain companies like Tech Mahindra, they've already instituted it. Health benefits for trans people, including gender affirmative surgeries under those health benefits, things like washroom access, which Danielle has also mentioned, also catering to every person's needs. For example, menstruating persons of all genders, will you have menstrual health products in every washroom in your workplace? And policies on policies and codes regarding your dress code. Are you going to be compromising a person's right to expression and comfort? And in many cases, their right to live without dysphoria just for the sake of an arbitrary cosmetic goal. These are definitely things that workplaces need to think about. And again, I 100% agree with what Aparupa had said earlier about having a quota. That's something that was supposed to come out of the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. And I mean, we all know where that is now. So, I mean, I've mentioned all of these things that can be put in place, but I do also want to talk about why it's so necessary. The reason you want to have all of this in your workplace is because you are communicating the truths of parenthood and partnership that is not a heterosexual man and woman. You are showing that you care about the health and performance of both cisgender and transgender employees. You are actively extending respect and acceptance for different realities of your employees. And every action that you are going to take as a company is going to change systemic oppression.
Thank you for that, Shambhavi. Aparupa, I'd love to hear thoughts from you as well.
So Shambhavi pretty much covered it and beautifully at that, and Daniel and Kononika have also spoken about it before. But I just want to point out what microaggressions can look like at workplace, right? Where as queer people, we're all only too familiar with it. Sometimes discrimination, as Kononika was saying, is not overt and is not in your face. I remember someone walking up to me at my previous workplace, and they'd seen the rainbow on my Instagram, and they asked me, "Hey, have you become lesbian now?" So because there was no anti-discrimination policy in place at my workplace, there was nothing I could do about it, because it is not that intrusive a question in terms of like your normative cishet world, right? And like Daniel also rightly pointed out about this. And I know that a friend of mine was sharing with me about how people would do this gesture, like this gesture in reference to him. And there's nothing, it's a gesture. How do you prove that these people are doing this gesture in reference to you? And also, like, my friend does this a lot, but he does it. It's very different when other people do it to refer to him. So please formulate that anti-discrimination policy, and like, please consult queer people when you're doing that. Please humko paisa de do. And you know, when you don't consult a queer person, when you're trying to put a policy in place which is for their benefit, it looks like this. Noida Sector 50 Metro is now She-Man Station. What? And then you have like your J.K. Rowling, who's like not written a trans character, who's not spoken about like trans people, claims to have donated and claims to have supported. But like, if you go down her Twitter thread, which I did, unfortunately, you see the kind of vitriol like these people are spewing, right? It's because you're not speaking to us, you're not speaking to queer people enough. And also, don't expect queer labor for free. Don't expect me to give you a crash course on gender 101, sexuality 101 for free, right? So I'm supposed to tell you what pansexual is. I'm supposed to tell you what the difference between pansexual and demisexual is. But like, you're not going to make the effort to maybe, I don't know, host a talk by me and give me like a nominal amount for it, but at least respect the fact that it is labor, respect the fact that I'm giving you my time and my knowledge, which comes from my lived experience, right? As queer people, a lot of our knowledge comes from the violence that we have faced at times. So respect that, pay us, and when you're drafting these policies, speak to us. And just to add to like what I think Kononika was saying with regards to spousal benefits. Yes, of course, as we all know by now, I really believe in like getting paid. I really believe in like getting money. But it can also be something as small as giving a person leave for attending the Pride Parade. If you're okay to give someone leave for Ganesh Chaturthi, they should be given a paid leave to attend the Pride Parade, which is just as big a festival for us. Maybe like,
and you should go along.
Yeah, go along, absolutely. Make it a company thing, no expense whatsoever, and you all get to have a party, and we look hella fine. So it's like win-win for everybody, right? Give people a holiday if they need to go take care of their partner, if they need to take care of their partner's family or their chosen family. Maybe they don't have a partner, and maybe someone in their chosen family is sick or is having a bad mental health day, and this queer person needs to be there for them. You would do that for someone's grandmother, father, mother. You would do all of that. You would make those exceptions. So you need to start expanding the definition of family, as many of us have said before. So yeah, those are some of the things that I think needs to change.
Thank you for that, Aparupa. I think that's very, very pertinent. And even when I think of inclusion at the workplace, I really want us to be able to do this, right? Like, not just get your people in and then take photos for your company website and your brochure. Like, how do you ensure inclusion across everything? How do you ensure inclusion in leadership positions? Like, why should queer people only have restricted access to certain types of positions? Why can't they be everywhere? And how can a company take responsibility for getting them from point A to that leadership position, which will include all of this? It will include the leaves, it will include the policy, it will probably include in the beginning a reservation quota, all of that. Yes, Daniel?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can't hear anybody.
Oh, okay. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I really can't hear anybody. I don't know, there's a problem at my side or...
Yeah.
No problem. I'm
Can you all
pausing
hear
the
me?
recording. We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
I can stop the recording 1 second.
I don't know what I missed when I was out, but when Apurva was talking, I would also like to make a point when it comes to policy is adoption policies. It's always maternity and paternity leave. What about a queer person when it adopts a kid? What happens? Will the person get the same benefit as other people in the company would get, uh, or no? So looking at that inclusion also, I think adoption policy needs to be added. And as Konika firstly mentioned about SRS surgeries in Mediclaim, because most of the time these treatments are very expensive treatments, and as a trans person, I cannot afford. And when I'm going and when I'm taking these treatments, when I'm on my hormone therapies and all that stuff, what about my mood change and the illness? That will I get the eligibility to work from home, if possible during those time, and will I be supported in the same way as other people would get supported in the company? And also when it comes to policy, one of the strongest thing that I've ever believed is that gender neutral toilets, yes, there must be there, and we all believe in it, but do not give us disability toilets. Do not put a board out there on disability toilet and say, okay, because there are no disabled people, uh, and they put a queer sign at disability and gender neutral toilet. No, we are not here to access somebody else's rights and somebody else's place. So give us what we deserve.
That's an excellent point, Daniel. Thank you for bringing that up. Also, just something you all have been touching upon beautifully throughout is the need to understand intersectional realities, right? And to know that like a queer person can be a person with disability, or a queer person can be a person that comes from a Dalit or a tribal community, and how do you recognize these different interplaying identities, but also don't take away their rights because they're intersecting or because they're overlapping, and how do you expand these rights rather than just contacting them? So thank you so much. These have been some excellent points. It's been an excellent panel. I feel like I've learned so much more about what needs to be done. I'd love to hear closing thoughts from you all. And it could be about anything. It could be about a call to action that you think an individual should take, or to what organizations and governments can do. I'm going to start with Daniel and then come around to all of you.
I think my closing point would be with a phrase that I really like much more is, the world doesn't change, you need to change the world. And it is same with workplaces, that it is our responsibility. We need to take stands, and as a representation of a community, we need to talk for ourselves. We cannot talk for others. One Daniel cannot talk on behalf of the entire community. We stand for ourselves, and we make a way for another generation so that they do not go to the discrimination that we have gone through.
Thank you for that, Daniel. Shambhavi, could I hear thoughts from you?
Yes, I'm going to cheat a little bit because you had included a prompt about what a queer inclusive workplace looks like, and I had notes for it. So, yes, so thinking about what a truly queer inclusive workplace looks like, I was very tempted to, be really snarky and answer this by saying, I'll tell you when I see one. But I do realize that all of this is, such a work in progress. And I think a truly queer workplace is going to come out of all the practices and ideas that we've been discussing here. Like this is the blueprint that we're really looking at. And hopefully, just that perfect workspace is going to flow out of this conversation and conversations like this.
Thank you. I do completely agree with the snarky comment as well, though. And I will believe there is one when I see one. Thank you. Aparupa, anything you'd like to add?
Absolutely, Vandita. I feel like as a queer person, right, I feel a lot of pressure to outperform everybody else, to be the perfect queer, I see so many of you nodding because it's so true, right? To laugh at a homophobic joke, to not be too loud about my identity, to not be too visible with my identity. And I think I would like to really see a workplace which is conducive of the multitudes that I contain within myself as a queer person, right? And also, my best friend and I talk about this a lot. So they're queer too, and we talk about queer timelines. So as a queer person, because you face so much violence, right, on a day-to-day basis, you go through like I was highlighting, from the time you step out of your house, and for many of us, from the time we wake up in our house, in our own skin as well, you go through so much that maybe you're not on par with the others who have more privilege than you. Maybe you're 27 like me, and you're just like figuring your way out in the social sector. You're figuring out who you are as a queer person, because you've also come to the realization and acceptance so late in life. So also for workplaces to be respectful of our timelines and to not shame like older queer people for, I don't know, just being older, right? And for not being on par with a 20-year-old who has a business. And I think one place that I saw this beautifully was at the One Future Fellowship. So I'm a One Future Fellow, 2019 cohort. And so I was the oldest, I'm 27, and the rest of the participants were much, much younger. But at no point was I made to feel like I'm less than because I'm older than the others, or maybe some of the others have more nuanced ideas than me. And in fact, like so much space was held for me to also learn from my experiences, to also, look at me as an expert. And I've also been invited to this panel. So I think also like be mindful of queer timelines.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your kindness. But I think that's a beautiful idea, that what does normal even mean? And how can we maybe disrupt the idea of normal, of just what wellness means and what your standards of achievement like at 20, 25, 30 should be, and to recognize how structural violence affects us every day and how that will dramatically shift our timelines. Thank you for that, Apurva. Konanika, I'd love to hear some final thoughts from you.
So moved from what everyone has said. I'm really like close to tears almost. It's so beautiful. Thank you everyone for sharing. But I think one thing that I hear a lot when I'm doing these kinds of panels is, people often say, you must accept that I'm just like you. And I think that's beautiful in its own way, but also quite inaccurate, because the point really is for us to be inclusive of people who may not be like us. And it's time is up, time is running. We have done a lot of wrongs with queer people through history, and with different intersections of queer people through history. So correct your wrongs, look at where you've been. Like Shambhavi said, speak to us. We know we've lived through these experiences, acknowledge them, work with us. I think those are things that really kind of are going to make this better. And I think, yeah, finally, I think I just want to say thank you, because this has been such an affirming space as well, just to kind of hear similar thoughts and just learn so much from all of you. So thank you so much.
Yes, and I think that's what I like the quote which says, right? We are queer, we are here, and we are not going anywhere.
That's a beautiful way to summarize this, Daniel. I think I speak for hopefully all of you here when I say that this panel has been such a warm and like welcoming space. And it's made me feel, and I think it will show to the world that a queer space is in and of itself can be super inclusive, can be super safe. And how can we replicate that within the other spaces that we occupy? So thank you for joining me in here today. I had a lovely time. I learned so much. Just a second.
I think you want to do that again.
Pearl wants to talk, I think. Pearl is there.
Pearl, I'm going to have to mute you. Sorry. I'm going to have to do that again.
Pearl has not invited us to their party. I'm very upset.
Yes. No, all I was saying was earlier as well that thank you so much for joining me today. I believe that when people will watch this panel, they will realize what a warm and welcoming space a queer space can be, and why there is such a pertinent and urgent need to make our workplaces safer. It's no longer just about inclusiveness, right? Like you all said, time's running out. People are facing violence. People are facing the sort of trauma that I would not want anyone to ever go through. And they're facing it every day, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to school, they go to college, they go to a workplace. personally, in their family spaces, in their workplaces. And thank you for bringing this together and for sharing with so much honesty and authenticity what queer inclusion at the workplace could look like. I have learned immensely. I've learned everything from like small things to be mindful of to what structural and policy changes can look like. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of One Future Collective and Social Offline, I'm very happy to have had you with us for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted
Thank
to say one
Thank you.
thing. I'm so sorry. I have like one point to add, right? May I?
Of course.
To take from what Konanika said, yes, absolutely, time's up. And if you are changing your policies, also apologize to us. If you realize that you've done something wrong, please circle back, say sorry to us, take onus of your actions. Don't ignore the violence that has happened against us, and then actually benefit from the progressive policies that you've now put in place. Acknowledge the wrong you've done.